Hello, thank you for joining today's session for SMAX Practitioner Forum. I'm Brindusha Kevorkian from the SMA Technical Success Team, and I have with me Dave Hackford, who's part of the Technical Success Team as well. And today we will be focusing on SMAX integration with UCMDB. Next slide, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just spend a few minutes talking about the sessions, and then we'll drill down into today's topic. Next slide. So these topics are best practices sessions that are supposed to provide guidance on SMAX out-of-the-box processes, the integrations out of the box, as well as tool capabilities. The goal here is to achieve a common understanding of principles and the terminology used in SMAX and help the community get most from the suite, as well as share use cases and best practices. So with that said, now we're moving into the topic for today, and Dave, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Today, we're basically going to be looking at how we integrate UCMDB with SMAX. And this is basically, like Brindusha just mentioned, using the out-of-the-box techniques to basically try and see how you can get the best out of using the both products together. First off, I'm just going to go through a little bit of an overview. So why would we go in for integrating SMAX with UCMDB? The benefits of basically integrating UCMDB with SMAX gives customers a number of useful features where they're able to start sharing data across a number of the ITOM tool sets, being able to keep a single source of truth, allows companies to raise requests, change, or instance against data that you got held within the CMDB, and you can easily then add discovered data into SMAX to keep track of assets if you want to use the asset management capability as well. So the key concepts. When deciding on whether to integrate SMAX with UCMDB, it's worth understanding why the company wants to basically do it. So you need to kind of look at your data models. You can then start to ask certain sort of questions, look at what systems will hold which data, and then how you should maintain that data before sharing it with other systems. What are the service management functions that you need to support and the information that they require? Does the current setup as SMAX/UCMDB support exactly what you require out of the box, or do you need to alter it to fit your company's requirements? All of these sort of questions are worth sort of asking and sort of thinking about, because if you're trying to basically integrate the two systems together, you'll kind of get an idea that each one has its own sort of database. You can kind of start to do different things in each system. And as soon as you then start to think about wanting to move the data from one to the other, it's then a matter of is what we have and how we expect to work fit with how the actual tools are currently set up. If you stick to pretty much out of the box, then it's not a problem. As soon as you start to then start doing additional functionality over and above what you get, it's not that you can't do it, it's just starts to ask a few greater questions which you then need to start looking at. If you kind of look at basically the service modeling aspect, you then sort of start drilling into how your actual service designs are within the company, and basically want to make sure that however you've laid it out within UCMDB and then how you expect it to then be used within your incident or your change processes, all of that matches up. So that's why I say it's key that you start asking a lot of those sort of questions and look at the data models of how you basically share the information between your different systems. If you look within SMAX itself, when the data from UCMDB is passed over, one of the key modules where it's all held is within the SACM Module. In the actual slide that I'm showing there, you can kind of see there's a number of servers, whether they're basically Unix, Windows, whether it's desktops like your personal computers. All this sort of information can then be passed over into SMAX from the UCMDB integration. if you've got service models, where you then start to see that information held is within your business services, within your infrastructure services, and then of course your service components. And with that, each of the different parts which fits within UCMDB around your actual service modeling, all of that data is passed into the relevant components within SMAX. So to try and understand how that data was passed and what is held within each system, kind of a little bit of an easy table to sort of show devices within SMAX. This data will contain all your UCMDB nodes, such as your Unix, your Windows, your network devices, your actual services within SMAX. This contains the business service and infrastructure services, which you have as CIs. Your service components, this contains all the UCMDB business application CIs. And then your system entities, this contains UCMDB running software, CI collections, and a number of other components that basically make up how the actual server is running certain types of software and installed software. The architecture of the integration is fairly simple. From a UCMDB point of view, if you've already got that set up and you have either one or more UCMDB discovery probes, then you'll know that the data that basically UD is collecting will all go into your UCMDB probe, and then from there gets passed over into the actual UCMDB server. In order for any information to flow from UCMDB to SMAX, you need a on-premise bridge server. This can either be Unix running a Linux operating system, or it can basically be Windows. So the choice is there. In order for basically running an actual sync, I've kind of laid it out so you can then see how the process works. So it basically is running from SMAX, a request from UCMDB would come in. You then basically, the probe takes that request, will then run an integration job. And with that, the data that is being collected from UD is then being held all within UCMDB. And there are a certain number of tuples which are basically imported in when the actual integration is first set up. So the integration between the OOTB and UCMDB, there's a package that gets deployed onto the UCMDB server. And with that, that is where you basically have got a number of tuples that are deployed. And from there, they are how you then query the database in UCMDB to pull back the required results for your business services, for your actual business applications, for the nodes, any virtual machines. So there's a good number of different queries that all make up part of the actual integration. And then any relationships between those actual service components, all of that would then be pulled back and then passed over to the on-premise bridge server. There's a number of chunks that then get held on the actual OOTB. So depending on how much data needs to flow over from UCMDB, the initial run, depending on the size of your organization, how much data you've got held within the CMDB, can potentially be big at the beginning, but then there is basically smaller delta syncs that can run. And so after the initial load, the next ones after that should be a lot smaller. And with that, you should see a small amount of data flowing between the two systems. So when the actual sync is running, you can basically, in UCMDB, you can set it so there's a certain full sync done every so often. So you can literally decide when you do, how much data and how often it should then be pushed over. On the SMAX side, there is basically an hourly job that runs. So whatever data is passed from the UCMDB probe onto the on-premise bridge, SMAX will then pull in that data from the on-premise bridge every hour. So if you've got a schedule set up where you're basically doing a full sync every Sunday, and then in between that you've got hourly syncs running on your system depending on how much change is taking place, then those changes will normally be reflected every hour into SMAX. And then with that, on the point where on the Sunday the full sync runs, then that full sync will then get pushed over at the relevant point where it's finished, to the point where SMAX goes, right, I now need to feed this in. So that kind of gives a bit of a detail for how often the actual job runs, and the fact that you can't alter the timing that it takes within the SMAX site, but you can define how often the schedule runs in UCMDB. There is a number of ways that you can do the integration. For this particular presentation, we're just literally talking about out-of-the-box. So with that, the out-of-the-box integration is pushed from SMAX to UCMDB, and most of the configuration is done when it's first set up, and that's when the package is then deployed to UCMDB. There is also a manual integration, and that can also, you get the package from SMAX and you need to then sort of configure it within UCMDB, and that takes a little bit more work and more effort. But for this presentation, we're just focusing on the out-of-the-box. So a basic sort of breakdown of how the actual integration works. You need to have a SMAX integration user which is created within the back office. The integration user, when they are then synced with the tenant, you need to make sure that that tenant user is basically given the OOTB role. The on-premise bridge software needs to be installed on a server. Most organizations will be using HTTPS, so in which case you need to then also set up the SSL certificates for the OOTB to use, and with that it will then need basically the SSL certificate for UCMDB and also for SMAX itself, and then that's basically got its communication sorted. The tenant config also needs to be loaded into the on-premise bridge, so it then knows basically what is the tenant ID that it's then trying to communicate to. If you've only got one tenant, then that's not really too much of a problem. If you're basically an MSP or you've got a number of tenants that you're planning on deploying, then you'll need an on-premise bridge for each tenant, rather than being able to just have one on-premise bridge dealing with all your tenants. The SMAX user needs to be created within UCMDB. This then gives the required privileges to basically run the SQL queries within UCMDB and pull back the results. An endpoint credential needs to also be set up within the on-premise bridge, and this is where it's then able to talk through to UCMDB. And then the endpoint itself needs to be configured within SMAX. Once you've set up all the information within SMAX, you then just basically test that, check it's all working correctly, and at that point you can then kick off a sync, and with that, SMAX will then deploy the actual package, and once that's been fully deployed, it's all connected up correctly, it will then, after a certain amount of time, it will start to then run the actual sync. So the UCMDB will then start collecting the information based upon the SQL queries, and then from there we'll then feed that data through to the actual on-premise bridge, and then once it's in the on-premise bridge, it'll then slowly start working through all that data to then pass it into SMAX. Once it's then in SMAX, you'll then find that the SACM module will then get updated with all the relevant nodes, services, components, whatever else that you've just asked for basically to be fed over. So what are the advantages of using the out-of-the-box adapter? The fact that it doesn't take too much time to set up, it's fairly straightforward to implement. The deployment method is automated, so there's not too much time taken to have to configure it and set it up. And with that, the understanding of what it is that you need to do within UCMDB is greatly reduced. So you're not having to worry about needing to have a great understanding of being able to use UCMDB in order to actually get the integration up and running. For the limitations, you can't really adjust the integration too much, so what's already been stipulated, all of the SQL queries and how they're configured are basically expected to be used the way they are. If you start to try and change any of that and basically alter it too much, then there's a good possibility that you'll break the integration and it'll stop working. When it's first run, normally there is, depending on the size of your organisation and how much data you've got within the CMDB, you could end up finding there's an awful lot of data to be synced over the first time. This can take a little bit of time to run through, and what you may sometimes find is when the data first arrives within SMAX, there'll start to be one or two sort of errors shown where basically, particularly around the relationships, the data isn't actually there yet. It's mainly down to the order that a lot of the actual SQL queries run. And with that, when there's relationships expected and not all of the actual parts have been brought over yet, you'll find that basically it'll error, not knowing where the endpoint is for that particular relationship. When the next run goes through, it will then normally correct all of those issues, and you'll then find that you've got all the relevant connections in place between, say, your node and your service component, or your node and your running software, depending on what it is that was didn't quite come over straight off first time round. So what I'm going to go through next is then basically drop into doing a demonstration and show how the integration, how you basically run through setting it all up and then seeing how once it's actually set up, see the actual data being moved across from UCMDB into SMAX and the sort of thing that you then will actually see within SMAX. Once that's done, I was just going to kind of just show how you can then quickly see within SMAX itself some of the features of once the data is actually in there, what you can then try and do with it. And that just helps show the benefits as to why you want to integrate your UCMDB with your SMAX system. So just let me open up my video. Bear with me. Can everyone see that video? Is that?
Yeah, we can see. Yep.
Yeah, brilliant.
Think one. Yep, works.
Thank you. So first off, we basically need to create the actual back office user, and this is where it's all about having an integration user which you'll use within your tenant. So with that, you have a choice. When you're actually creating a user, they have a role that you can basically have as your integration or just as an actual user. For normal circumstances, most people that you're going to configure within back office, it will always just be an ordinary user. However, when you're dealing with the integration, you want to stipulate it's for integration only. And with that, you then put all the details in as you would with anything else, and then you just need to supply whatever is the email address that you need for that password to be to allow the user to have their password configured for that integration account. Once it's then set up, you then basically need to just sync it with the tenant that you're basically going to be using. So if you're in an MSP position, you'll be having a number of different tenants. With that, you just need to stipulate which account that actual integration user is being used for. So click on Save. So now that that user has been created and has been synced with the actual tenant, when you then go into the actual SMAX system and look within the people side, you should be able to then scroll down and find your new user. If you then go in there, they'll initially be given the self-service portal user. You'll just need to remove that and then grant them the OOTB remote agent rights. Once you've done that, save that. And now your SMAX user is now set up. The next part is basically moving on to the actual OOTB agent itself. And this is basically the on-premise bridge software that needs to be installed onto your OOTB server that you've got set up. You need to download the software. Let's say you can either be downloading the Windows or the Linux, depending on your appropriate system. Once you've downloaded it, just double click on the install. This is based on showing how it works on a Windows-based system rather than the Linux, but the concepts are exactly the same. So just click through Next, accept license agreement, Next. Choose where, and this I just use the default location for the folder. In here, you then basically are entering in that same user that you just set up within the back office. Click install, and then it will just run through installing the software on your server. Give that a few minutes or so, and then that will have actually installed. Click done. So now that it's set up, you basically need to add the OOTB agent to SMAX. So if you click on Add, it's in the same windows where you downloaded the agent from. You give it a name for what you're going to call the agent. In this, I call it OOTB agent. And then the next important thing is download the connection file. This is where you're basically able to then tell the OOTB what is your tenant ID and how it's going to be able to connect to your, so from the OOTB through to the tenant. Once you've got that, you just basically copy it and then put it into the appropriate folder within the OOTB install. So in this, because I use the out of the box, go inside program data, Micro Focus, the on-premise bridge, product, conf, and then you just would place it there. In this particular, because I already run through doing this a few times to different tenants, that's why I had a server conf there already. So now that we've basically got the OOTB more or less set up and communicating, what we also need to do is give it the actual credentials so it understands how to talk to UCMDB. And with that, this is where we have to use the Credentials Manager UI. So in here, you'll then basically create a new endpoint. There's a number that you can choose from, but in this circumstance, we're using UCMDB. In here, you have to give the endpoint a name and then give it the actual details that allows it to basically log into UCMDB. Once you've done that, click Save. And now the credentials are locked into SMAX, so with that, it'll then know how to basically communicate with UCMDB. The final part for this is to basically set up the SSL communication. From here, I needed to basically go to my actual UCMDB server. We need to basically create a server.keystore. Now, you may already have one which is already set up the way you need, or just for this scenario, I just wanted to run through all the different steps. So basically, you then give it the password for creating the actual server.keystore. Once that runs through, you then basically are giving it a self-assigned sort of certificate, which is what I'm basically running through, giving it a name, sort of the organization unit, what your city, locale, and all the rest of it is. And once that's actually complete, just re-enter in the password for it and then click save. Just enter in the password again. So that's now generated the key store. Next part here is to basically need to now create a certificate that can then be used, which is what we need to export, so it can then be used within SMAX. So in this, I just happen to have given the name UCMDB server.cert. You need to enter in the appropriate password for the actual server.keystore in order to basically extract it. May well need to speak to the UCMDB admin to then get an idea of what that server.keystore password is, because it's more likely will have been changed from the point of any of the HP or Micro Focus out-of-the-box passwords. Once the actual service cert is being created, you then just want to copy it from the UCMDB server and then place it into the appropriate folder in SMAX on-premise bridge. Now, I'll just pause the video here. You can see basically where we were before was in the on-premise bridge agent and the product. Inside of there's a util, and then third party, and then this is where you're then able to see where all the Java related folder structure is. You then just need to basically navigate to the lib, and then security, drop the actual UCMDB.cert into there, and then with that we'll run the following commands to then basically import that UCMDB cert into the CA certs file. And then with that, once that's being loaded, then the on-premise bridge can then start using and understand any communications with that certificate. Just carry that on. So at this point, we're literally now navigated to the bin folder of the Java side, so we can then use the key tool within the on-premise bridge, and just running that same command through to then import the actual UCMDB cert into the CA certs file. So you just need to then enter the password to be able to then change the CA certs. You then get shown basically the certificate that we created before on the UCMDB side, and then basically just click yes to then import that into the CA certs file. Once that's complete, you then will need to just stop and restart the on-premise bridge agent that's running on the server. And with that, when it then starts back up again, it'll then be able to use that certificate. So back within SMAX, now that we've set everything up from the actual on-premise bridge, we now just create an endpoint. So here we're then basically creating the UCMDB, choosing the on-premise bridge OOTB agent name, and then that's running on the OOTB agent that I set up before. And you click Add. That's now created that endpoint. You just then need to configure it. So in here, we then enter in the details for our UCMDB system. So that's the IP address of the UCMDB server, the port that it'll then communicate on, which would be 8443, so it then uses SSL. The credentials are set up as the endpoint on the on-premise bridge, which is the UCMDB. Then default domain, which is what the probe within UCMDB is using. And because I'm using a UCMDB probe, then I enter in the probe name here. And then you can choose what type of thing that you want to sync across. In this case, I'm just using both infrastructure and business. And with that, we test the connection. And it's now come back successful. Because of that, I can then basically run through doing the actual sync. So you can see what's actually taking place. When it does the very first point of the actual sync, in UCMDB, there is this actual integration point gets created. So we've got the name of the endpoint that I created, which is the OOTB agent, and then with that, the underscore and then the tenant ID, which is what is running. And where I was talking about the number of different T-pools that basically make up the package that gets deployed, all of these are the queries which are basically the T-pools that have been added in. And with that, you'll be able to do a search for them within UCMDB to then see exactly, and they're all stored within the same folder locations. As the job is then running through, each of these T-pools are triggered. They'll then bring back a certain number of results. And then as you can see from the actual node point of view, there's 1,281 of them being seen. As I just moved the video on a bit more, you can then see the actual status of where each one of the different queries are up to. So at this point, everything is just being collected on the UCMDB side. Once all of the different jobs have been run and have come back successful, then the data is then pushed over from the UCMDB probe onto the on-premise bridge server. And then once all of that's completed, we then can move back into SMAX, and we can then start to see, as the different syncs take place, you'll start to get a view that looks like this. Admittedly, first time round, you just have one sync, and with that, whatever is the number of results that have been returned will then be shown. From here, you can then see, as the data is then brought into UCMDB, from UCMDB into SMAX, you can then start to see the numbers in your actual SACM module start to increase around your servers, all your service components, etc. So when you actually then have a look inside to find a particular server, just click on that. Start to see some of the information that's being brought in, so you know a lot of the asset details. One thing it then shows is this server is managed externally, so that's how you know it's come from UCMDB, and you can see it's UCMDB global ID as well as other bits of information like the actual CPU information or any of the other component parts that make it up. And then one of the other key bits is then being able to see how the actual server looks. So if I just roll that back slightly, So with that, you can see the impact from if that server has got a problem, or you want to raise a change, or you basically want to see how that server would be impacted in your system. You can see all of that detail held in SMAX. So with that, when you do the show impact, you can then see this server is part of the expense system, which is part of the expense management service. So if you're raising any changes, you can then get an idea of what that knock-on effect would be. Same with if you then got an incident, etc. So just to get an idea of how, once the data is then brought into SMAX, what you can then kind of do with it. So that's the end of the demonstration. Let me just pause that and bring the presentation back up. So that's kind of the end of the presentation that put together. Just move that one. So something of the other parts which is kind of interesting to need to sort of start digging into is around the troubleshooting, and then how you can make sure everything's working the way that you'd expect it to be working within the system. The common sort of issues that basically get faced, particularly when customers have been trying to integrate SMAX with UCMDB, are kind of reconciliation errors, data mapping problems, connection issues, configuration problems. If we look at like the reconciliation, data in SMAX can sometimes get merged, whereas in UCMDB they are separate. Now, by this, the engine that SMAX uses is a little bit more simplified compared to the engine that UCMDB does for doing reconciliation. And with that, there's times where data can basically get merged into, particularly from a AIX Unix server point of view, we found, particularly if it's running on VMs, where basically the actual serial number in the background may end up being used on nodes numerous times. And with that, when SMAX has basically imported that data, it started to get a number of different servers that got merged together. One of the key aspects from that point of view is to try and see if you can get the data more accurate within UCMDB first before moving some of the actual data over. Again, when it comes down to the data mapping, it's important that companies understand how their service model is basically set up and how they're expecting it configured within UCMDB, and whether or not is that going to work with the actual model of how SMAX works. So it's worth kind of like doing those checks first up front before you just happen to, let's just go ahead and set up the integration and then expect it all to work. If it sticks to the out of the box methodology, then more often than not, there will not be a problem. It's just if you kind of then use the different components within the service modeling in UCMDB in a slightly different way, and then think, all right, why isn't my data come across in the way that you were expecting it? And it's normally for that sort of reason. The connection issues, again, they basically, it's normally down to user accounts and making sure that what is configured within the OOTB endpoint, what is configured within UCMDB, all of those need to make sure they match up and are the same. If there's any rights, making sure that they've got the right level of privileges to be able to do the in order to check through all the equals, pull back the relevant results and be able to then pass that information through. If they haven't got the required rights to do all of that, then again, that can sometimes cause a problem. The configuration problems can normally be around the SSL and making sure everything else is configured. So UCMDB certificates are being imported into the on-premise bridge, as well as the actual SMAX, and making sure all of those are working. And then when certificates change on, say, like the UCMDB certificate needed to be updated, that you then updated it within the on-premise bridge. And sometimes that gets forgotten, and with that you can then find that the on-premise bridge is no longer able to communicate to the UCMDB server simply because the SSL certificate was updated. If we start to then look a little bit more at the reconciliation errors between SMAX and UCMDB, like I was sort of covering before, check the UCMDB endpoint within SMAX to see if there are any failed sync messages. When you look within the actual integration in SMAX, you can then go to the relevant endpoint. In there you'll see, like what I was showing before, where everything was coming through as being successful. That's what you'd like to see on a regular basis, but there are occasions where you'll see failed messages, or it's basically it's work but with an error. And when you get those sort of issues, you then want to basically just sort of go in, have a look to see what it says. There's normally a brief error, and if that's kind of still not really giving too much of a clue, you then just kind of need to sort of start delving a little bit deeper and checking in to see what it is that may be causing the problem. Sometimes the problem is not always that obvious, and particularly for the example I was talking about before, where you could end up finding that data is getting merged. So with that, it'll always look as though it's actually syncing the data correctly. However, when you actually then look within the history of a particular node, you may find that it's changed serial number numerous times, or it's changed its name due to the fact that it was then merging some of the information. So it's always important to try and keep a track of the actual, not just what's happening on the integration side, but also looking within the actual SACM module, checking your nodes, seeing that the information that is held in there is also still accurate and correct based upon what you're expecting to see. To help understand how some of the actual matching is done, I just thought I'd put in the actual matching rules to basically give an idea of how complex or not so complex it is, depending on what type of CI information is being passed across. So from a device point of view, there are quite a few rules that get applied. So with that, it will expect to find the global ID, if there's a barcode, if there's an asset tag, model or serial number, BIOS tag, the host name and domain name, and each one of those rules is kind of run in an AND logic rather than an OR, which is kind of why sometimes we've found that the issue around the actual merging of some of the data has occurred, because the global ID may well be different, but the serial numbers and things like that could be the same, so it then tries to add each one of these up rather than then sort of going, all right, yeah, that's definitely a distinct node compared to the other one, and then that's where some of the issues that we've found. So there's definitely been a bit of work has taken place to try and enhance some of the actual discovery within UD, and with that to then try and make sure that the information that can then be passed across from UCMDB into SMAX works better. For the actual service, as you can see, it's only a global ID in the name that's required for that. For a system element, just the global ID, and the service component, again, is just global ID and name, so they don't really use anywhere near as much reconciliation as the device does. To try and correct a lot of the reconciliation issues, like I say, best practice would sort of make sure that you're using the latest CP for UD. You can even sort of check the data within UCMDB before doing any syncs. With that, you can then create a report in UCMDB for distinct nodes, looking at, for instance, serial number and making sure that everything is kind of unique. If it's not, and you've got a number of devices all using the same serial number, then you know that this potentially will cause an issue as you're actually trying to feed that information through to SMAX. Best would be you then correct that information, and then with that, once it's all shown the way it should be, you can then run the import and bring the data from UCMDB into SMAX. Each time you think about doing any of this integration work, then obviously try and keep in mind all matching rules that are used between SMAX and UCMDB, and then that hopefully should make life a little bit more simple. When troubleshooting within SMAX, the main part that you'd basically be looking at is the on-premise bridge. So if you're an MSP, you'd be the one which would basically have an idea of, sorry, if you're basically running the actual SMAX service, then there's going to be a number of on-premise bridge users from an MSP point of view, but the actual on-premise bridge would reside in the relevant companies. So with that, there's sometimes going to be a need for potential, if there's problems at the back office side of the configuration of the on-premise bridge user, then that would need to be done by the MSP. But all work with the actual gathering of the log files and whatever else would normally reside on the actual on-premise bridge. So whoever looks after that then need to basically go in and pull back a lot of the information. There is a number of logs within SMAX itself, and with that, I've listed a number and where to basically find that within there. So a lot of it would basically be like the mass underscore OOTB log, the mass underscore error log, and the mass underscore UCMDB sync log. If there is a problem and it's not really working, then normally if you're needing to raise a support ticket, these would be the sort of logs that you then be asked for to provide to basically try and work out why the actual integration isn't doing the job it should be doing. When data is exported from UCMDB, it is held on the on-premise bridge, and with that, it's normally passed over in XML data files as what are called chunks. SMAX normally deals with a maximum of 50 chunks in one sync, which can hold X number of CIs. So when you're doing the very first upload and you've got hundreds of thousands of CIs that are needing to be passed within the actual SQL queries, then it's quite possible that you could find that there's 50 XML files get placed into that util repository folder, and in there you'll basically, there's normally two folders. One is the task input data, and that's where when all the data is collected from UCMDB, it is then passed into. Once all of it's being collected, it then basically gets put into the task output data, which is then shows that it's now being sent from the on-premise bridge to SMAX. Once all of that data is being processed, both of those folders should then be empty and there shouldn't be anything there. If the data is not being passed into there, then you know that there's an issue between UCMDB and the on-premise bridge. If the data is just being held there and it's not then going into SMAX, then again you can see that there must be an issue between the actual on-premise bridge and then SMAX. If you then sort of look within the actual log folder on the on-premise bridge, there is a folder specifically just for UCMDB, and normally whatever integrations are needing to be set up, there's a log folder specifically just for those. Inside of there, you'll normally find the UCMDB-10.20 log. There can be a number of those, so the 0 through to I think like 9 or 10, depending on how long it's been running. There's the error.log and the output.log, and all of those are well worth checking if there's any issues being shown within the actual integration. I just thought I'd run through some of the different types of errors that you can actually sometimes see within the log files, and particularly from the error.log. For this particular thing, you can see that there's a connection timeout, and with that, you just normally it's now down to some form of network issue, and with that, it's then worth checking to see that the on-premise bridge is working, UCMDB is up and running, and all the network connections between them are all fine. If any of those happen to be down, then with that, that's the reason why you're most likely to see this sort of error. Another type of example is a connection refused, and this is where, like I was talking about earlier with SSL, if for instance the UCMDB certificate has been updated and you haven't actually updated the on-premise bridge, that means at the point where the OOTB then tries to communicate to UCMDB, is then again a connection refused, and this is where you see this type of error. So once you've then updated the OOTB Java key store with the CA cert file, and then stopped and restarted the on-premise bridge, you'll then find that this connection will then be fixed, and you'll then see everything should be working fine. Another type of issue is basically the credentials and what you've entered into the endpoint using the actual credentials manager on the on-premise bridge for UCMDB. If, for instance, the details you entered in there are not correct against what user is actually set up in UCMDB, then you'll get this sort of error. And with that, best thing to do there is re-enter the details correctly, and then with that, the endpoint should then be able to communicate properly. From a UCMDB point of view, it's also worth being able to then try and see how things are running if there's any problems. So it's all well and good being able to check that SMAX is working fine, the OOTB is working fine, but then the final point in the chain is literally the UCMDB side. So it's worth checking that the UCMDB probe, or if you're using the integration service, is running correctly. If there's nothing obvious and they seem to be up and running and everything seems to be fine, then in which case look in the actual dataflow probe, check in the runtime log folders for the probe error, and see if there's any errors being reported in there. If there's any problems with the probe itself, and the wrapper probe gateway.log, for instance, might give you some details about what may or may not be working in the probe. And then the other is basically the fcmdb.adapter.opb agent _tenant ID. That'll give you an idea that the actual integration service for the tenant is running, and if it's stuck. So if it's definitely up and running, then you should know that it should at least be able to pass information through. If there's nothing really sort of untoward in there, then that's where, say, you should be able to then see within like the probe error log and to see if there's anything being reported in there as to why the integration's not passing anything through to SMAX. To just sort of kind of help give you a kind of steer of where you can kind of go for an understanding about all of the actual documentation. There's the main integration documentation for SMAX. There's also a a practitioners forum part, which basically was set up showing how to basically run through doing the integration, kind of same steps as what I basically walk through in the demonstration. And that shows how you then configure everything with all the commands of how you basically do the SSL and a number of different other parts. So everything that I basically talk through and discuss within the actual demonstration is then all highlighted within that document as well, which is on the practitioner notes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Very nice and comprehensive presentation. Let's see, we can open for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the question manager, and we'll be able to answer them. You should also be able to unmute and answer the question live.
So there's one there about the slides are downloadable.
If you need access to the slides, send me a note, and we'll be able to provide them. Dave, if you don't mind moving to the next
Yeah.
to the next slide. Okay, so we do have, if you are here, you probably have already the links to the SMAX Practitioner Forum, but if not, I suggest keeping an eye on the list of sessions that are upcoming. Register using that tiny URL. You'll get a calendar invite back to you that you can save in your calendar, and then as well convert that into a recurring placeholder meeting for you. So if you move to the next slide, so that's my contact information on the next slide. If you need to send me a note, we are also interested in gathering additional topics. So if you're interested in specific topics, let us know. Dave covered today the out-of-the-box integration. We do have plans to probably go into a second session to cover the, I would say, the more complex integration where it can be configured. We also have a number of other topics in the backlog. Drill down on a number of capabilities coming with 2019-05, but always looking for more information. And we do have a question. Let me see, a question from the participants. Let me just open that. Can we install OOTB on the same server as UCMDB?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I mean, I've done that within my own sort of testing environment. It works. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good idea doing it on your actual production environments, simply by the fact that it depends on where your SMAX system is hosted, for instance. If you are basically running SMAX, say, by a third party for you, or it's running in a cloud environment or whatever, and you've got OOTB, which is your gateway through to being able to talk to your SMAX system, then there'll be a number of firewall things that you'll need to configure, and security will most probably want to check for how you have information passing to and from. So you may not necessarily want that running on the same box that your UCMDB server is. So if it's just for testing purposes, yeah, not a problem. I think from a production point of view, not a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much. And then there is one more question. So if there are two ways, I'm aware of. One is through REST API for 3P tool, and the other is through OOTB agent from for MF internal tool. Is that right? Or is there any other way integrating with SMAX? So I would say, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it depends on what it is that you're trying to integrate with SMAX, really. I mean, from a UCMDB point of view, you'd use the OOTB. If you're talking about using other things, yes, you can use like sort of connect it and other tools, but most of the main things for trying to do any sort of communication through SMAX from a third party, you'd use the OOTB, and you can use in there, you can set up a REST API connection. So it all then feeds through your OOTB. So it really comes down to what it is that you're actually wanting to integrate with.
Exactly. And, you know, the out-of-the-box productized integration for UCMDB, obviously, you know, has been written with for this purpose. You know, it does have, you know, specific, I would say, intelligence in it, right? And, you know, so it's preferably to go this way rather than trying to reinvent the wheel if it's for the UCMDB integration. Obviously, if it's a generic integration, then yes, you would use the REST API. Okay. So if there are no other questions, we will wrap up the session here. Thank you, Dave, for presenting. Thank you all for attending, and looking forward to having you in one of our next sessions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.